They actually found it. I wasn't quite positive. I've never turned it off myself.
The water
Anytime we're
shut off?
gone for more than
Yeah.
2 days, I turn the water off to our house.
Do you really? Like
It's
the
all, well,
main?
it's almost 100-year-old pipes.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Yeah, so.
Okay.
Okay. Good afternoon. This is, today is December 27th. It's 3 o'clock in the afternoon. We're at the Law Enforcement Center, and this is a final year-end meeting of the City Council's Policy and Finance Committee. Members, you want to introduce yourselves?
Tony Emerson from District 4.
And I'm Brennan Jensen. I'm filling in for Richard Harmon. I'm from District 6.
And I'm Karen Hiller from District 1, and I'm chair. We basically have two, what will probably be short items today. One, just to approve the minutes from December 2nd, and then we had a residual one piece out of our big governing rules package that the council wanted us to give a little further attention to. So is there anything else people wanted to consider today? on the
Madam Chair, I
agenda?
will abstain from the minutes as I was not here for them during the meeting.
That's fine. Any other agenda items?
No.
If not, I will call the meeting to order. Let's approve the minutes.
I move approval.
Second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. The minutes are duly approved with the abstention noted. Okay, moving on. The discussion item for today is the governing body rules, section 8.2. And that section in your packet, City Attorney Robertson Mary Feeney, who's here today from the City Attorney's Office, provided us the text as it is with the package that we approved last week about the appointments of people to standing committees, council members to standing committees, and the term of service on those standing committees. The issue at stake right now, the appointments are done each year annually by the deputy mayor. We have our MTPO, which is sort of a standing committee, the Transportation Planning Organization, is a 2-year appointment. And that changed a couple of years ago. It's elected, though. It's not appointed by the deputy mayor. That changed to 2 years a couple of years ago because it would allow somebody on the city council to move up and chair. It's a joint city-county planning meeting, and also our terms were January to January, and their terms were April to April. Or no, reverse. Ours were May to May from April elections, and theirs were January to January. And so we were offset in terms internally in that group. But nonetheless, we had a suggestion that the terms for the standing committees be 2 years. And so that is our subject today. You have on the very last page of your packet, nobody's proposal in particular, but City Attorney Robertson did take a stab at putting some language in at the various things that had been discussed. Basically, the suggestions were 3. We could approve none of them, one of them, or 2. Under the appointment section, we had a suggestion that we go ahead and add language that says, and shall make a reasonable effort to stagger terms for the purpose of establishing familiarity and continuity from year to year. So it doesn't absolutely suggest 2-year terms, but does put some language that people have been doing anyway for the most part, but there is a certain amount of executive privilege, I guess, in the deputy mayor's role. Then the other suggestions, one of them was to simply make them all 2-year terms. Or as an alternate to that, to leave them as 1-year terms with the exception of the Economic and Community Development Committee, and 2-year terms in that committee. And my understanding is that the reason behind that, Brendan and I have both served on that committee, is that at least right now, that committee has been establishing new routines, and it is actually a grant-making committee, or recommends grants, and goes through a pretty involved process. And so the suggestion came from Councilwoman Clear, who served as the newest person on that committee this year. And there must have been some conversation, you would know better, about continuity, yet you'd been on it for 2 years.
Well,
Chair had been
I'm
on
on
it
it for 2
before.
years because I asked to be reappointed.
Right.
That wasn't intentionally done.
Well, I think that happens.
Just in discussing And I would hope so. But in discussing with other committees, it seems like that's a fairly rare occurrence that somebody is reappointed back. And so the goal of this was just to make that more of a tradition or a recommendation. Locking everyone into 2-year terms in stone isn't necessarily the best call, but if we made it, sort of a recommendation and a business as usual practice that they get put into 2-year terms, that makes everything a lot easier to plan. For one thing, the council person has some idea what they're going to be doing for the next couple of years. It allows the city staff to get to work with these folks better over a longer period of time. It really is just good business practice. The downside of it is we lose our flexibility. And if somebody doesn't like the committee they're on, say they want to try something and they find out, oh my gosh, this is not my passion, I really, really hate this, they're stuck with it. So it's a catch-22 on either side. And so what my hope had been was that we could craft an update to this that sort of comes up with a recommendation. We would recommend that the existing deputy mayor at the time appoint this person to a 2-year term, knowing full well that if that's not realistic, that it's not set in stone. But this just creates the business practice that this is what we want to do, and this is sort of the expectation going forward that it would be done, but not require it to be done, because there's a lot of circumstances where that's not realistic to do. The second part of this, which is also critical, is to stagger those 2-year terms. And so, again, not something set in stone, but create the tradition or the recommendation that under normal practices, the committees change out. And there are changes every year. So every deputy mayor does appoint new people to new committees. But the general consensus is that you serve on a 2-year term and that the committees are staggered, the appointments are staggered. So the committee always has junior folks with new ideas and senior folks with experience and an understanding of why things are done the way they are. Now, how we craft all that into several sentences in this section is going to be the challenge at hand. But I would recommend we start with the first option and try and horse that into what we think is a good fit. And then if we can't get that done, because it has the most flexibility of the ones I see.
If you would read what you mean by first option,
so
just
the first
for
option
people who are
is,
watching as well as for
so
us.
under our sheet of paper, it's section 8.2B, appointment. The deputy mayor shall appoint the members to each standing committee referenced in subsection A above. And then we would add, or the current example is, and shall make a reasonable effort to stagger terms for the purpose of establishing familiarity and continuity from year to year. That's great, and I think we should add something about the term, a recommended term would be 2 years, not to exceed, something along those lines. The rest of it then that is the current part that's approved is appointment shall be made by the first meeting in February, which again is why we're meeting today, because it has to get done. Each council member should fill out a committee preference list for a standing committee, and the deputy mayor should make every reasonable effort to appoint council members to the committee of their choice. So, basically, I guess there's 2 things we need to accomplish. First of all, we need to agree, do we want to craft language at all that says we would recommend a 2-year term? And then the second point would be, do we all agree indeed that we think they should be staggered? And then the third is, how do we combine all of that into something that's elegantly beautiful and makes people fall to their knees and weep with poetic justice?
If I may, Madam Chair, thank you. I guess I like what Lisa wrote here in 8.2B, what you just read, Brendan. And I think that gives what we're wanting is really continuity. We don't necessarily
Absolutely.
want to lock people into 2-year things,
No.
and that's going to be difficult because, like, for next year, whoever gets appointed this year, there could be. You just say if this committee, all 3 of us might not get reelected. So the next year there wouldn't be anybody on the committee.
Well, but I'm not up for election next year.
No, I meant Richard.
Oh, right.
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 But I
Present
like
guest
this, and it gives the intent
Yeah.
of continuity without locking anyone into rules that, well, all the committees now are basically set for 2 years. And the deputy mayor comes in the next year, you can't move. Basically, that person doesn't have anything to do. I mean,
Well, but staggering them, they would never always be set for 2 years because you'd always have someone rotating off.
right. So you're saying if you do staggered, you can't do 2-year terms.
No, I do both, but just like in the council is staggered in 4-year terms. So the odds are up in 2 years, and then the evens are up 2 years after that. So there's always continuity in the council. I'm saying take that same process, shrink it down a little bit and apply it to the committees.
Right. You'd have to do that then, starting the next year when there's an election.
Correct, yes.
It wouldn't account for 2017. That
Right,
wouldn't
it
work.
couldn't because the new
Right.
folks coming on,
Right.
that doesn't work. But, so
Right.
mathematically, yes, it has to work out. But it, so basically takes the same process that we're all using now and just
Right.
applies it to the committees. But I would add the flexibility in there that that the deputy mayor would need to be able to make changes if necessary.
Yeah, well, and I think that's what it says right now. It just says reasonable efforts, right? Yeah, reasonable effort to stagger terms for the
Yes.
purpose of establishing familiarity and continuity.
Yeah.
So, to me, I would be great just doing 8.2 here and let that be it. I just don't think we need to codify 2-year terms because that then handcuffs. I mean, what we want is continuity and familiarity. What we're doing on this, for instance, this committee, there's really no reason for us all to be on the committee for 2 years. I mean, there's
agree.
no carry-on items. Maybe there's 1 or 2 committees, but I think in that case, those people could request, just like you did, to be
But-
reappointed.
What you lack when everyone is gone is the depth of experience of the history.
Sure. So
Whether or
also
not you have
staggering.
new work. Somebody
Right.
could come up next year and say, hey, we'd really like to talk about locking everyone into 2 years. But if no one had been on the committee from the previous year to go through that, the discussion that was already had, that would have just been rehashed again. Because that continuity gets lost when everybody changes out at once. And so my goal is without definitively preventing it, to make the recommendation be that doesn't happen. And I do agree that staggering terms can give that insinuation that would happen, but I'd like to set the expectation that it is at least something.
Maybe like where possible, or
Well, yeah, I absolutely would be fine with where possible, the term would be 2 years.
I think, and I've spoke up about it before, I'm inclined to agree with Tony. I think that for the most part, I've now been on the council for 8 years, so I've been through, well, almost 8, so I've been through 8 appointment cycles. And I've been deputy mayor as well, so I've been responsible once to manage that cycle. People come on committees with different strengths and experiences,
Sure.
whether or not they've served on the committee before, whether or not they've been on the council before. You raised a point. I mean, we're going into an election cycle where 7 of our 10 elected officials are going to be up for election. 7. The mayor and 6 of the 9 council people. If those roll, you don't have anybody with much experience on the council. Even if you did, and as deputy mayor, what I looked at was, depending on the committee, was somebody, if there needed to be transition, somebody who was seasoned or seasoned and experienced and interested in that particular book of business. Kind of somebody older and seasoned, somebody in the middle, and somebody new. Because out of 9, with committees of 3, it can be tough to balance them.
Sure.
We do have committees, as Tony pointed out, the policy and finance and public health and safety only meet when there's an issue. They don't have ongoing stuff. So it really, you can structure that committee as the deputy mayor, if you know it's coming, to address that issue. And you've got someone, as Councilwoman Ortiz said, she just kind of picked out that the topics she's interested, really the only ones are the ones that roll up to public health and safety, and so she prefers to be on that. She does a wonderful job with it. So she could take 2 new people, probably at pretty much any time. And yet something like ECD, well, transient guest tax in the past, as an example, they were doing grant making every year. So continuity, not necessarily the same person, but somebody who is really into it. And that might not be somebody who's been around a long time necessarily. I mean, just seniority doesn't mean that you have the time or the interest in applying yourself to an issue and really helping to make good decisions. That also lasted for a few years, but now they're not making annual decisions anymore, and they put a lot of effort, and they transitioned. They all asked to be reappointed last year. I think we had the same that same committee, regardless of what somebody's term was, for 2 years straight, so that they could finish the project that they started with TGT. And now they're going to be pretty much on the same, it's going to be a monitoring function.
Yeah,
So
they just have to
the 2-year
review.
thing would be okay, but it was, were both of you on Transient Guest?
Yes.
I've been
Well,
on transient guests. I rotated off because a couple of them were, well, I was on the board of the Jayhawk, which they voted to get money, so it wasn't appropriate for me to
yeah,
stay.
Jeff Cohen and Elaine and I are.
But for instance, when you rotated off,
Yeah.
you were midterm, when we're trying to balance people amongst just 4 committees, at one point, when I was deputy mayor, you were the eager beaver new guy and had lots of time, it seemed, and flexible, so I put you on a whole lot of stuff. But, once that settles in, that's not really fair. So if you've got somebody who's on too many committees, you want to be able to rebalance.
Which is why I don't advocate to set anything in stone.
I guess
All I'm-
my preference in
Yeah.
appointing people, as much as negativity can come into power brokering, like the power to assign committees, which is pretty benign with us, but nonetheless it's there.
Ways and means.
To be able to affirmatively make the
Yeah.
best decisions that you can as deputy mayor based on input from people who say, I'd like to continue, or, we really need some consistency in this committee this year. Could you please do that? That being able to work it in that way, rather than a deputy mayor being stuck in the position of where, based on a 2-year term and somebody's election changing and rolling off, or somebody resigning midterm, which we've had a lot of, it doesn't let you rebalance.
But you're advocating for something that wouldn't exist under my proposal.
It would happen all the time, I think. Like with this, if you had 2-year terms, you'd still, like, let's say all 7 people that are up next time, there's new people in 7 slots. All of a sudden, you've only got 3 people with experience at all. You're going to have to put the very best people that you can and spread them around.
And that's true. And this is a unique occurrence. We wouldn't normally have so much of the council rolling over. And that's why I don't advocate for locking this up in stone. I'm just saying make it a good best practice that in general, where possible, we appoint people to 2-year terms that are staggered for continuity. It's certainly never going to be doable in all cases. However, that sets basically the standard by which we want to assign people to committees. Will it happen all the time? No. And it frankly will have to switch a lot in general to get people moved around.
But
That creates the standard of which we want future councils to work under.
But the JADO appointments are 1 year at a time.
But JADO's not appointed by the deputy mayor. We're only talking about appointments by the deputy mayor.
But we are talking about how much work each council person has to do. And so what we're wanting is, theoretically, when you take the 4 committees that we have, and then you add JADO, and then you add the other assignments, like somebody being on the Healthcare Advisory Committee and somebody being the council assistant liaison at this point. Those are done internally in the council. Then the mayor appoints people to the Expo Center Board, to the Go Topeka Board. All together, there are about 20 appointments that we make.
But every person is to serve on 2 committees regardless of their extra workload. So I don't understand how that argument has
The
anything to do
difference
with
between
this.
2 and 3 and being stuck in a if you're stuck, if you have to put somebody in three committees. So if you've got somebody who's already in 3 2-year terms on 3 committees, and then that person, maybe wants to serve as the healthcare advisory rep or gets the voting position on JADO.
Sure.
All of a sudden, you're out of whack,
And
at
that's
which
fine.
point you're back having to take them off things
But you have
and
to
move
do that
people
now
around.
anyway.
Correct. But
So
my
how is
point is
that
that you're going to
di-
have to do it anyway.
Right, and so what I'm saying is that's not going to change. And even if we indicate in here that we would like to have recommended 2-year terms and stagger them, you're still going to have to do shuffling every year.
So if you're going to have to do shuffling every year, why doesn't this more generic term?
Because this generic term doesn't give any guidance to future people about what to do. All it says is you should stagger people. Well,
Maybe it needs, you're right.
that's what I'm saying, and that's why I'm
So
advocating.
So maybe it
Keep
should
this
say
and just-
stagger.
Well,
No, it does say stagger.
It does.
But what does that mean? Does that mean switch them out every 3 months?
No,
And
no,
stagger
I
them then?
think this,
Stagger
you're right.
terms
I
for
think the
purpose.
stagger's not the right term, is it?
Well, no, we
Well,
want the terms to be staggered, absolutely. I'm just saying we need to recommend what term is, but make it flexible enough that the deputy mayor can change it as the situation arises.
Again, I just like, you know, I never like as a, whenever I'm in charge of something, I hate to be handcuffed, you know.
Sure.
You want operational flexibility.
Right, and I'm
So
advocating for that.
I just hate to put too many stipulations on here because everything you do, then the person, and frankly, I don't think there's anything that I could add next year to policy and finance that would be any better because you're usually doing discrete things from year to year.
Right.
It's no different than what we do every Tuesday night. You know, an item comes up and, you know, you research about it, you learn about it.
Sure.
And then you vote on it a week later. And I don't think what we're doing in committees is any more in-depth than what we do every Tuesday night.
It's
at
much
least
more in-depth in some cases, because you get much deeper into the weeds at a committee level. So,
maybe I'm doing too good a job on Tuesday nights then.
I mean, it's a possibility. Well, so my experience in a lot of committees is that the whole thing gets rolled, and that's not working. And so the goal here is to create the environment where that happens less. We can't get rid of all of it because you're absolutely right, Karen. There are a whole lot of situations and things that occur on a yearly basis that require flexibility, that require us to change things on the fly. And so we can't lock ourselves into, once you're assigned for 2 years, there is no possibility of switching. All I'm advocating for is let's make that the goal and document that this is the goal that we want people to work toward. If it's not achievable, that's fine. But this would at least set the expectation that when you're appointed to a committee, unless something happens, we'd like you to plan to stay there for 2 years. If you don't like it, then that's a reason to change, I agree. But that would bring some longer-term continuity to these committees. And I mean, that's why the council is staggered every 4 years. Can you imagine if we changed everybody out at once? Oh my gosh. That happens at a committee level, and sometimes it doesn't matter, but often it does.
That's
know,
how
we-
federal government happens every 4 years a lot of times. And you
Yep.
get new Secretary of Defense,
Yep.
new Vice President, new Secretary of the
Yep.
Treasury.
They roll
And-
everybody
And it
over.
works fine because honestly, the staff is the continuity. I mean, you know, when
Mm-hmm.
we're thinking about changing something, you know, Mary will say,
Mm-hmm.
the reason we didn't do it is X, or we used to do that. So the staff is really continuity. I mean, we're
And they are,
kind
but
of almost addressing
you're
here.
gonna, we spent half the year ramping up because of that. And the staff were excellent. They spend a lot of time educating people. But that's time lost that could have been working on other things.
Are you talking specifically about ECD?
Other committees in general, when you come on a new committee, you have to spend a considerable amount of time learning about that committee and getting up to speed. And if the entire committee is spending half the year learning what that committee is supposed to and getting up to speed, then that's a lot of time that's lost.
You know, you've been, and the perspective is good, because you were new to the council, and you were on both the committees that were doing some real serious
Some heavy lifting.
rewrite of policy that was multi-year. I mean, this one was serious and it was huge, but it was all done within a year. So
Yeah, issue
a
specific.
one-off, if you will,
Yeah.
project. But transient guest, and the thing is, it's just a point in time that the transient guest committee and the ECD committee were redoing procedures. Those are, and you know, transient guest is done, ECD will hopefully be done soon. And so, and ECD, both, I mean, you had a new person, but both you, the other two people were seasoned on that committee. There'd been a trade around between me and Michelle in the intervening period, but both of us had been very involved in it. And so sometimes it's just hard work and it's tough and people have differing opinions, and I'm not sure 2 year terms can solve that.
Well,
I mean,
it won't
but
solve the
by the
opinions.
next year or two,
All it does
No.
is provide continuity and experience.
but, you know, we had, Jonathan Shum was on that committee, and it changed. He was deeply into it, had done his homework, he was the new one on that. But then he went off the council, and we've had, I was trying to count, I didn't want to waste Angela's time, but probably in the 8 years I've been on the council, there have been 8 people that went off midterm.
Sure. That
And,
happens a lot.
you know, and the person who replaces them doesn't necessarily bring the same skills and experience that were the reason that you put that person on
Yeah.
the committee. And
Which
so-
is why you need the flexibility to balance, which is
Right.
what we put in here.
But to have the language that says there should be continuity, that the appointments should be made with an eye toward continuity and familiarity,
Well,
allows the discretion without somebody
advocated for that.
yanking somebody off
Not
a committee.
advocated for that. So we've advocated for the staggered terms and the recommended 2-year appointments. That creates those things in certain circumstances, but I'm absolutely not advocating for you have to assign committee people to committee based on whether they have any experience with that. All of that stuff will sort of come naturally if we can follow a regular 2-year schedule, with the exceptions where we've indicated. We don't necessarily want to control committee assignments based on whether or not you've served on that before, because that would create, I mean, you can't do that. There's not enough people and there's not enough experience to go around. I mean, you can't serve on all the committees fast enough to gain that experience to be useful.
I guess, and I may not be expressing this well, that my preference from a performance day to day, year to year basis is that as the deputy mayor, in relation to the rest of the council, that ability to do the very best that you can
Sure.
to make affirmative appointments every year, keeping in mind what people have said they wanted to do, what you know of their talents and experience, and where that continuity is important to have at least 1 or 2 carryover people.
Right.
I
So
think
you-
has been done, but every year, but B is better than saying, oh gosh, I'm stuck with this person here and this person here and this person here, so I'm gonna have to yank somebody off this committee to balance over here.
But we
And
haven't
I
said you'd have
myself
to
am
do
gonna
that.
be deputy mayor this year, and so I was on 3 committees last year, but I don't wanna be on 3 committees this year because I'm on JADO and I'm on this. And so all of a sudden, you're having to deconstruct something instead of just
But
construct
don't you
it.
already do that anyway? Don't you already look at the committees when you make assignments and say, you know what, it would be great if this person would stay on?
Yes, absolutely.
So
That's my
all
point.
I'm advocating for is to write down and make the standard what you've already done. You've already said, you know what, it'd be great if we could leave some of these people on the committees for more than 1 year, because that helps with continuity.
And Brendan, that's what I think A does, or B does here.
It does,
And
I just think we should make the
It shouldn't
recommendation.
say stagger, it should say something else.
Well, but stagger is the proper term
like
though,
that,
because we don't
reasonable
want people to
efforts.
change, we don't want to change the whole
Okay.
committee at once.
My only disagreement or difference of opinion is that I just don't think we need to codify the 2 years in there, because that person knows, I just don't think we want to lock that person into, that's a consideration. I think there's enough other variables that they're juggling here to try
And
to
that's
either
true,
balance.
but we're not locking anybody in. We're just making the
Right.
recommendation. Because I think after 2 years, you should rotate off. I don't think somebody should be on a committee for 3 or 4 years, because then you never get anybody new there.
Right.
So
But the deal is, you would, if and when you're deputy mayor, you would have to make that call. Because if you got somebody who has a preference to be on a certain committee and they want to be on it every year,
Well, and-
you're
and-
going to get to make the call whether
and
they
in
get
every
on it that year or
nonprofit I
not.
serve on, you are forced off after a specific period of time, because that's just good business.
I understand. I'm just saying.
So all I'm advocating for is to make that the recommendation, to not lock anybody in. All we're doing is basically stating what we're essentially already doing in making that the recommendation, as opposed to, right now, we don't declare what that is at all. So how is somebody in the future going to know what we intended to do in this case? Because we don't define that. We don't define term.
So I guess thinking through this, so just like operationally, so this year on the new deputy mayor would say, okay, everyone's staying on the committees that they were on last year. This is the second year
for
of the
this
committee.
year, I don't think we should change anything this year because of the election. I do think we should set it up so that if we put this process in place, it follows the election cycle better, so it's easier. Because right now, if you appoint somebody for 2 years on a committee
And they're off after a year.
yeah, that doesn't work. But if it's staggered so that everyone's elected, then they'll be around, at least in theory, for a couple of
But
years.
okay, then the next year, think about this though, the next year, everybody's starting 2-year terms. So everybody's on the same committee for 2 years, and then how can you stagger? Right, because
So,
you're going to
well,
have, some people have
to
to be
get
on for
into
3
the stagger
years.
rotation, you'd have to appoint some people for 1 year. You're correct. Because
Right.
you'd have to start the stagger at some point.
Right.
But they did that when they switched the council,
Right.
the council manager form of government.
Frankly, I did think that one through, and the only way it would work, or you run into the same thing we did with the MTPO, which is, oh, you had a 2-year term, but your
Yeah.
term is up in the middle of it,
Yeah.
would be to tie the staggering to the election cycle so that let me think. No, it doesn't work, does it?
No,
So-
it's-
so
You're
that
right.
the
You'd have to
people-
tie it to the
So that
election
the
cycle
people who are elected,
somebody's got to be on it 3 years.
to get into the cycle.
they'd
Right.
they'd
Yeah,
actually
and
match
we may have to
up.
do that initially.
Well, they wouldn't, because if you do a
Yeah.
two-year term that's not the first 2 years and the second 2 years of your term of service,
Mm-hmm.
then people's 2-year committee appointments are gonna end midterm because of the election.
Unless they get
People come in.
reelected.
I know it, but you're just creating something that's just such a mess that, it'd have to just be the 2 years.
But Karen,
so
we're already
everybody would be
doing
on a
this
full
now.
2 years.
We're already doing this now. We already have to make corrections mid-year for the election cycle.
We don't have to change people's terms on a committee because the committee assignments are a year at a time.
And that's true, but if you're attempting to stick them in a committee and have continuity and roll them over, even though you're doing it unofficially, you still have to make corrections for the elections. And you have to do that every now and then when the elections happen every 4 years. So essentially, every 2 years, there's a possibility you have to make changes.
What I'm saying is
However, we're already doing that anyway.
you'd have to do 2-year terms, and so they wouldn't be staggered, except because of elections. If you wanted it to not conflict with the election cycle, then the 2-year terms would have to be the first 2 years of your 4-year term and the second 2 years
Right.
of your 4-year term, which means that the committees themselves would be the same committee for 2 years because the council members, there wouldn't be an election in the 2-year appointment time.
And that's true, but then you still have to rebalance all the committees on the off years. I see where you're going with it. Well,
You shouldn't, because no one would be, unless somebody resigned, no
well,
one would be changing
or
up their
somebody's
position.
unhappy, or somebody wants to switch. So there's always the possibility you'd have to make midterm balances. So, but the idea then, yes, is the idea would be everybody would serve for 2 years if you pick the committee you want to stay on and that sort of thing. But locking everybody in like that is unrealistic. That's not going to happen. There is going to have to be midterm balancing. We've all agreed on that. So
Yeah, I just, and I totally understand and appreciate what you're trying to do. I just don't know if that's adding anything except some complexity.
well, so I think adding staggering terms without defining how makes it impossibly more complex because you're creating this undefined term that doesn't mean anything. Well, I mean, without context, what
Well,
does
maybe 1 year
staggering
you
terms
want-
mean?
Maybe 1 year you want one person held over, the next year, maybe 2 of the people want to stay on,
And that would be fine.
Yeah.
If that's how you want to define it, if you want to define the stagger and not the term, that accomplishes the same thing because it de facto will create 2-year terms.
Yeah, I just think if
If
someone's.
2 years is the dirty phrase, I'm fine with that. Then let's define stagger and not define term. Correct me if I'm wrong on this, and we're splitting hairs, and attorneys
Yes,
love
we
this
are.
sort of thing.
Well, the issue is, if the only thing that would make sense for the 2-year term idea is that then in fact they would not be staggered because those assignments, 2 years at a
Everybody's
time,
change
would
out.
be the same people for that entire 2 years.
Right. And then they
so
change out.
And then at the 2-year anniversary, there would be elections, and then there would be appointments for the
Right.
next 2 years,
Well, but
which would be good for 2 years.
And that's what I was
There's-
getting at,
then
Brenda.
that
The
then-
staggering is what has driven this conversation, not necessarily the term.
Well, we're tearing
Yeah.
it apart in
Yeah.
order to
Right.
make a good recommendation. The
Right.
deal is that you would then change them out and try and, at the time that the reappointments were made, the goal would be to establish some continuity by making sure that there were at least some reappointments that provided familiarity and continuity. If that's the goal, then the staggering's not the issue. The goal is to do the appointments in such a way that there is carryover, familiarity, and continuity.
But that's what staggering is.
Right.
The term length is not so much important as the staggering. That's
the
why we do it
continuity.
here, because we want people to carry over from one committee, or the same
Right.
committee from year to
Right.
year.
I just think, I mean, if I read this, and I think, you know, a reasonable person reads this, I think if you're a person accomplished enough to be elected and then to be the deputy mayor, I think, you know, I think you can figure this out, I guess. You know, without needing a formula.
Well, and I would agree. So I think we should define what we mean when we say stagger in terms of, you know, at least someone needs to carry over from one year to the
Terms
other.
For the purpose.
But I think if I could suggest that stagger, to me, and I'm not looking at the dictionary.
I can do that.
But the term staggering implies to me holding people back rather than moving forward.
Like a bad connotation.
And so if what our goal is, if we read that, if you substituted the word assign for stagger.
Mary, what's a better word to use than stagger? Or how can we wordsmith this to accomplish what we're all, because we're all talking about the same thing.
I want you to
we're talking
try
past
reading
each
that
other.
with the word assign in it and see.
So make a
I think stagger makes sense to me because it is followed by for the purpose of establishing familiarity and continuity. That's why you stagger, is so you've got some senior
I like this
members and
language. I
some
mean,
junior
to me, this makes
members.
sense. I mean,
I mean,
and I totally understand what you're trying, I mean,
Yeah.
we're trying to all accomplish the same thing. I
And
just-
that's why I think we're getting at. So I'm okay with the language that's there now. I look at everything from how is somebody going to read this in 5 years? Are they going to have any, or maybe 10 years? Are they going to have any idea what we're talking about when with the language that's in there now? Because I've gone back and read some things in the charter from a long, long time ago, and I don't know what the heck they're talking about, and nobody else seems to.
Now they
because
can go back and watch this tape.
and that's helpful now, but in the past, stuff hasn't been explained very well
Sure.
because at the time everybody knew what they were talking about. And so when we try to go back and understand what that committee or what that council did, it doesn't make sense because we don't know the context that they were working in.
Right.
So with this, I'm trying to make sure that both the purpose and the context of the issue are in here so that in the future somebody can read this and say, oh yeah, that makes perfect sense what they were trying to do.
And let me throw out two things on that. One is that when I was suggesting some things earlier, in council member Harmon's absence, he said, people know that stuff, we don't have to write it in our rules. No, I don't think we should put it in there on some of the suggestions.
Right,
So there
right,
is an
right.
argument to be
Yeah.
made that some of that is intuitive or it is contextual.
Yeah.
And the contextual would be that most of us are familiar with the United States Congress and with the state government,
Sure.
where committees are assigned every year. They are generally assigned and selected, sometimes
That's
for
all done
political.
by seniority and with political things.
Well,
behind it.
it's done for political reasons, but it's
Yeah.
also done to mix up people who are senior and who are new, and typically that happens on committees, and so it is contextually, that's how we do things in government.
Yes.
Unless somebody politically wants to just pull rank and throw everybody off a committee and put all new people on or whatever, and that does happen from time
Yeah.
to time. Not sure we can prevent that
No.
with this language here.
Well, and I'm not advocating to prevent anything. All we're trying to do is create a recommendation for what to do.
So Brendan, basically you want it to be crystal clear in the future what our intent was here, and you're not sure that these
Right, I don't
convey
think
the
this would
intent.
convey someone that doesn't understand what the context of our conversation, what the intent of our change is.
I mean, do you want to add something like, for example, one of the three? I mean, do you want to just be explicit?
I mean, well, that was my comment with defining what a term would be, but in light that doesn't seem to be the popular solution, which is fine. I mean, that's
sure.
why you have committees to work on
Right.
things. And Mary, perhaps you could make a recommendation here, just to define this in a better way for explaining why the staggering is important. I mean, we do have for the purpose of establishing familiarity and continuity, but how do you execute staggered terms to create familiarity and continuity?
I mean, could you put after terms, could you put in parentheses, i.e., one member would carry over into the next term?
Yeah,
Well,
one member
the-
would be appointed or would serve multiple years. That would accomplish the same
Right.
thing.
But there
Having
could
worked
be
with
much, just as much from somebody new who's
Sure.
reading this
Yeah.
and looking for guidance. The term, and I'll just throw out the assign, having been through it too,
Yeah.
it's like, okay, I need to pick people and create continuity. If it says stagger, I could just as likely look at that and say, oh, I need to be rolling people off these committees and and not letting people stay on too terribly long, and instead putting newer people on. That they could read stagger.
Well, but
as
that's good. That's good board policy. You absolutely want people to roll off of boards
I
and
understand.
committees. So I
I'm just
fully
saying,
support.
in terms of somebody trying to figure out what they're going to do
Yes.
this year, if that means I should throw everybody out when your goal was to have continuity.
Well, and that's why I think we need to further define it, because we do want them to throw people off at some point. We do want new people and new ideas on here. If we just say we want to keep people on there for continuity, well, we may leave the same 4 people on there for 4 years. That's not a good idea. So that's why I like the word stagger, because that does indicate that your
Yeah.
term will end. I just think we need to define how that process would work.
Mary, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Mary, would it be permissible here to, after stagger terms, put like i.e., help me here, Brent.
I think this is very clear. I'd recommend that, Mr. Emerson, you make a motion to approve Section 8.2B, and then see if it passes as presented. I think it's very clear, and the intent is clear.
I agree.
Make your motion and
If you're
see if you
happy
get a
with it as an
second.
attorney, I mean, I've known too many attorneys that say if you don't define everything down to the millisecond and the millimeter,
But these are just
then
guidelines
a judge
anyways,
will
right? I
look
mean,
at
these
it and-
aren't really, this isn't like force of law on anybody.
Well, it's a rule and procedure, so
Yes,
it has
it
to be,
is.
but it gives a much discretion to the deputy mayor, and
Yeah.
why don't we give it a shot, and if 3 years from now it's just not working, come back and change it. But
Well, if it won't step on anybody's toes,
No,
I will then, Madam Chair, if you don't mind, I would recommend then, I'd move that we adopt Section 8.2B here as written.
and I will second.
Okay. I have questions for you
Okay,
then.
sure.
If, again, it's been interesting for us to wander through this conversation, because your proposal at first was the 2-year terms with the idea of continuity in an affirmative way of making sure that people stayed on committees. Now we're talking about rolling them off committees. Was your thought in proposing 8.2B that would be the only item that we recommended out of this committee of these?
We still haven't talked about 8.2C.
That's why I'm asking.
Yeah, I mean, but yes, that's actually, yes. In my opinion, B is all we need.
Okay. Would it be, if that were the case, if we were going to do a qualifier, would it, and I don't have it written, but would the thing to do then be to put something up here, if there were some parenthetical clarification to say, for instance, 2-year terms of service, to suggest 2 years up in this one?
Well, should that go in B or C? 'Cause
But
now I'm
anybody that
confused.
comes in as a deputy mayor, they're not going to be doing this in a vacuum. They could go ask legal if they really had a question about the intent of something.
Well, but they're looking for some, we're choosing
Right.
to give guidance. If we don't
Right.
need to give guidance, it's fine. It's fine, and
Yeah.
it's worked fine for years, and we don't need to do anything.
I mean, we're already giving more guidance with B here than we
Correct.
have.
And
Correct.
so it's worked fine before, and people have done their best to make good appointments and assure continuity, really. So that's been happening, but if there's a sense on the part of the council that we need to say more than that, and our intent is continuity, yes, we want people to change out, but the primary is continuity, then we can come back to this too. But since you were thinking about something parenthetical that would clarify,
I mean, unless we put the clarification down in 8.2C, which I guess that's what they're trying to do here. The thing I think we should approve B as it's written and then try to clarify it in C. I mean, is that what the attempt has been done here with the,
I think the 2-year term is completely inconsistent with staggering terms. So
Well, and so that's why I'm confused, because,
Yeah.
I guess I would, Mr. Emerson has recommended adopting subsection B as the
Yes.
only change to the rules. And then subsection C would just remain one-year terms.
so that's where I'm concerned we should provide some sort of guidance about, unless you think we don't need to. If
I
you
don't
think
think guidance-
staggering is enough, then I'm willing to, I mean, you are the expert here at words and things.
Yeah, I think it's very clear
Okay,
to me.
I'm fine with that then. So we would approve B and not any changes into
And
C.
no changes to C.
Correct.
Just,
would be mine.
just for context of this
sure.
Yeah.
vote, so we
Sure.
kind of knew where we were.
Right.
All right, is there further discussion on the proposal, which is now to do 8.2B as, with the proposed language?
Correct.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Same sign? All right, that recommended language for 8.2B would advance from this committee as a recommendation to the council. We had some preliminary discussion about whether people wanted to do anything else.
I mean, in light of the comments from Mary, as long as everyone thinks this will give us the intent of describing a practice that really is already happening,
Right.
that's all we were really trying to do, is to make sure that the recommendation is for the continuity of the committees, because there is instances where that's incredibly important, and we have no idea what the future holds. This committee may be handed a huge project in 2 years that requires people in continuity. So this creates sort of the recommendation that happen.
And that, I mean, you just don't know. Really, I think every deputy mayor has done a good job, but what if somebody, deputy mayor, went all political and just threw everything up in the air, and
Yep.
the next year they want to change them all back,
Yep.
to get that
Exactly.
continuity back? Well,
Yep.
you do that too. All right. If that's it, we will each, of course, as a whole and as committee members, be prepared to explain that. This will move out and likely be on the council agenda for the 10th.
Okay.
Yeah, it's got to go
Right,
quickly,
Mary? Are
because
we in time, you think, by doing this now?
Yes, should be able to get
Because
it
we'll
on
have
for
it
the
ready for the
10th.
agenda meeting this week? and-
Yes.
yeah.
I'll make sure it gets on the agenda on the
Thank you.
10th, as long as the city manager is okay with it.
Okay.
Yeah, because
Sure.
we'll have to start doing appointments in February.
Yeah, because the
Right.
deputy mayor will be elected on the 3rd.
Oh, my.
And
Right.
will already have or likely already have the ballots out for people to sign up for their committee.
So how
it
is-
really was important for us, and they might not quite, but
Mm-hmm.
usually those come out within a week or so after the deputy mayor takes office, and so
So
then
how
they've
is
got
that
the
going to work? Does the deputy mayor have to be one of the three that are not up for election?
No, because it's just that year, right?
Well, but everybody,
We
there's-
just shifted so that, starting this year,
Yeah.
our terms will be from January to January
Right.
instead of May to May, so that it will not conflict with somebody's election.
But aren't there a bunch of people that are up for election at 17?
Well, but office changes in January of 18.
Ah, okay,
Okay.
okay. That would make sense, okay.
So yes, there will be some
That's true,
people
'cause
running for
they
office
moved all that
during the
around.
year.
Yeah, but
no
they'll get
matter whether they win
reelected.
or lose, they all will
From a
serve
workload
until.
perspective, though, that's a good point, though.
Yeah,
If you're running, it's gonna be hard to be deputy mayor.
yeah.
right?
That's an awful
now
lot of
that
work.
we have reduced the deputy mayor's duties
well,
to
that's
appointing the
true.
committee and
That's-
nothing
well,
else,
that's true,
unless something
yeah.
bad happens to the mayor,
God
it
forbid.
ought to be fine.
Forbid.
True, yeah, because that was my next question was, whew, all
It ought to
right.
be fine. And who knows, but likely the seniority traditions that we've had would
Sure.
carry forward, and we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, we can
once
sort of
again.
hand that around a bit, which is good. I mean,
Right.
gives everybody a chance to serve.
All right, well, with that, thank you both so much for
Yeah.
convening on short notice so that
No
we could
problem.
get this committee work done.
Thank you.
And I declare the meeting adjourned, and Happy New Year, everybody.
Yes. Do we get a prize for being the last committee of the year?
Yes. We're all fired.
Our prize is that we can approve the minutes now by the change in our governing body rules, thanks to Mary's help.
Nice.
At least in part,
Partly.
by email instead of having to have another meeting just to approve the minutes.
Oh, dear.
You never get done.
No, because you'd be continually meeting to approve minutes.
Yeah.
Oh dear.
Are we still
Have a
on?
happy new year, everybody.
Looks like we're
Thank
still
you.
on. Are we still on, or?
I don't know. They haven't blipped us out, have they? There we go.
I'll
There we
say
go.
so.
Yeah, and Brendan, and I